This is the little purse that we're going to make today, with a dove on the front in this lovely Christmas fabric. Right, so the first thing you need to do really is make a template. I've made one out of cardboard. You can use, the measurements should all be in the box down below. I've made it out of cardboard and I've cut a hole in the centre. You could make this out of a clear plastic, a thick acetate, something like that if you want to see through it. I haven't got any of that, so I've just made it in card, and I've made the hole purely because I wanted to be able to line up the template over a certain area on the fabric, which is this dove, so I can centre it, see to centre it, to get it right. So you need to cut out a front and a back, 2 for the linings, and then you need to cut your zipper. I've just used a standard zipper and I've cut it to 5 1/4 inches long, so I don't need this bit. You could also use zipper on a roll if you wanted to. You also need a tab. This is going to go on the end, like it is on this one. This is going to go on the end of the zip, so that your zip doesn't go into your seam. So your tab is 2.5 by 1.5 inches with a 1/2 inch seam. We're going to make a 1/2 inch seam at each end. These are all cut 6 inches by 4.5 inches. You also need 2 pieces of wadding batting iron-on. I've not used an iron-on one, I've just used 100% cotton batting like you use for your quilting, for some scraps that I had left. The one that's 100%, just 100% cotton with no scrim, tends to cling, so I've not used anything to stick it on at all, but you can use an iron-on one. Right, so the next thing we're going to do is make our zipper tab to go on the end of our zip. So you've got a piece 2.5 by 1.5. What you want to do is we're going to do a 1/2 inch seam, folding a 1/2 inch seam at each end. If you need any help with that, I've just drawn on, I have a 1/2 inch ruler, so I've just drawn a 1/2 inch line at each end with pencil, line that up on my mat, and then use that as a guide to fold them in. And then I've just finger pressed them down. It's not worth going to the ironing board for that. You could also use your ruler to help increase that, and then fold the whole thing in half, edge to edge, and do the same thing with that. So that's your little zip tab. You will see it's wider than your zip. It is wider than your zip, but put it over the end of the cut end of your zip where you've cut the end. I don't put it all the way up to the seam. Then if you do catch this, if it does get caught in the seam when you're sewing it, it's not as bulky because it won't have the zipper in there. So you're going to fold that down. You can use a bit of glue. I've got fabric glue stick. You can always put a bit of fabric glue to help hold it in place while you sew it. Stick that down, stick that down. In a few seconds that'll be dry enough to then go, and then you're just going to sew across. You don't need to backstitch because we're going to, once we've sewn it on, we're going to trim these bits off the side. Right, there we go, that's that sewn in place. I'm just going to trim off these ends, flush with the side of the zip. Right, so there we go, that's that one done. So now we're going to get the other end ready. Now what I do, you don't have to do this, these bits could be sewn into your seam, but what I like to do is fold, we'll turn it over to the wrong side, fold these end sections down so they're at an angle, a 45-degree angle I think it is, across the end of your zip. Stitch them down, glue them down, couple of little stitches usually works. I've used a dab of glue before now. I can use a bit of this and then heat set it with the iron, and that sticks them down. Usually. This just makes it neater. This is giving you all the tips to make it neater. I'm just going to go and press that with the iron. Right, there we go. See, I've just been over to the ironing board and pressed those down. That was just a little bit of glue stick on the back, and the iron just sets it quicker. This is going to make your seams neater, so they don't suck in so much, so they don't suck right in at the edges, because they won't have a lot of bulk in them. So the next thing we'll do is then we're going to attach that onto our panels. So there's all sorts of things you can use for doing this. I'm going to have the zip at the right end and the tab on the left. So it's going to be sewn in approximately in the middle like that. Now you could run your glue stick down there, heat set that with the iron. You don't have to heat set it with the iron, but if you do, it's just quicker, so and gives it a good hold. Or I like to use this double-sided tape for sewing, covered in bits. So it's a 1/4 inch tape. This does wash away when it's washed the first time. So I'm going to stick that down, take away tape top, and then put your zip face down and centre it. Roughly centre it. Just checking I'm still in shot here. In the middle. And press that down to hold. You don't have to use this. You could use clips, you could use pins. I find pins can distort your zip a bit if you use those, and I have had times when I've used clips and they slip. Things still move, so I like to use the glue or the tape. So that's now down. Now I'd be quite happy to, when you can either sew that now, like 1/8 of an inch from the edge to hold that in place. But before we do that, I'm going to put the lining on face down. So you've got your outer panel face up with your zip face down, and then you're going to put your lining, one of your lining panels, face down on top of that. Now you can either add another row of tape, or at this point you could add little clips. So then you're going to sew this with a 1/4 inch seam. You'll need to put your zipper foot on probably, and then start here, sew all the way to the end at a 1/4 of an inch. Don't forget to back tack at the start and at the end so it doesn't come undone. But there you go, there's that stitched up. Right, so when you've sewn in your zip, just open it out, close your zip back up, and then fold the front down and then your lining down, and then we're going to go back to the sewing machine and at 1/8 of an inch, approximately 1/8 of an inch, and I tend to use a 3.4mm stitch length. I'm going to stitch a line down here to hold this in place, to top stitch this. It not only looks nice on the outside, but it holds this section in place on the inside so that you don't catch your zip in it when you're undoing it. Press it down, give it a good press first. Right, so that's that bit finished. So just trim the ends off. There we go, that's your edge top stitched. So now we're just going to repeat what we just did on the other side. So I've added tape, take off the backing, and then you're going to take this whole section and put it face down. Again, lining up your sides, line up the top edge, and then stick that down, and then get your other lining and put that face down, lined up to the top edge there. Attach with clips. I think actually before I do that I'm going to undo my zip. Undo my zip. and then put that face down, and then attach with clips again. So I'll just take that and sew it, and then I'll be back with you. So again, that's now stitched on. So we're just going to repeat what we did before and smooth these two edges down. I'm going to press it, and then we're going to top stitch down this edge. Right, there we go. That's that one done. So all we've got to do now is trim those ends. And then undo your zip. Must do this because you're going to have to turn it through. And then we're going to fold the front and the back together, and then the two lining pieces together. And then we're going to pin or clip this all the way around and then sew. So what I recommend you do is when you've got your zip tab, push it to the inside, to the lining side, and try and line up. Try and line up your two edges with the seams. You can see there, two top stitch seams. Now I like to pin this bit. Let me just move all these out of the way to make it look a bit tidier. I like to pin this bit so it doesn't shift. So I'll pin that first. I need a sharper pin. I do have preference for pins doing these little things, but again, you can use your clips, whatever suits you. So I'm just going to add in a couple of pins. Again, on the other side, didn't trim that, let me just trim that off. Again, you're going to try, make sure these two seams are lined up so it looks nice from the outside when you're done. Pin that. I find a pin on this section is much better because you know it's not going to slip, whereas a clip might slip slightly, and it can get the knee up to the pin. Now we're going to sew. We're going to start here, sew all the way around. I'm going to sew to here, and then I'm going to come back to this side and then sew all the way around here and come back to here. You don't have to do this, you can just sew all the way around to that side, but I find it sits neater because you're going in the same, you're sewing in the same direction, because here you're pushing up that way and down that way, pushing it all up and down, and then if you keep going you're then working in the opposite direction so it can stretch this side out a bit. So if you sew from here to here and then turn it over and sew from here to here, it makes it just, I think it makes it a little bit easier. So I'm also going to put a couple of marks in. That's going to be where I turn. This is a friction pen. This will disappear with the iron, but if you haven't got one that disappears, it's generally going to be on the inside anyway. You could just put a couple of pins there to mark that. So I'm going to start, sew all the way around to here, and then flip it over, put a mark on that side actually, and then sew all the way around to the other side. Like check here that you don't want to catch your zip tab in there, if preferable. And the same this side, you shouldn't catch anything in, but it's just worth a check beforehand just to make sure that your 1/2 inch seam allowance is going to miss that. If it's not, just move it slightly over a little bit. Okay. So that's it. I've stitched all the way around, so it's just finishing off now. So I'm going to use my pinking shears and trim this all the way around. Right, oh, let's trim off those threads. So now, the thread there, in bits. Okay, Okay, find it now at the moment, just easy. Where you've left your gap, fold and finger press those back. This is why I like to leave it slightly wider here. You just get makes it easier to get a neat seam. Finger press those back now so that when you turn it through, once you've turned it through, they fold inside a lot easier. Again, I use my ruler just to make that crease a little bit sharper without having to go to the iron. There's my iron over the other side of the room. So now we're going to turn it through. This is why you needed to make sure that your zipper was left open. There we go. So that's nice and neat. So we'll just pull this bit back out. We're just going to sew that little seam. There we go. I've stitched quite close to the edge, not as neat as it could be, that. But I usually use a smaller stitch, like a 2mm, and I stitch as close to the edge as possible. And then trim the edges, and that's that finished. Tuck your lining back down inside. Zip up. And then you're all finished, all ready to go. You open at the end. We don't put a zip tab at that end because it means you can open your little pouch wider, purse wider. If you weren't bothering about opening that as that wide, you could put another zip tab at that end if you wanted to, but there you go. And then, so this is less bulky than it would be if you didn't. Hope you enjoyed that.